This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Hello and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Teider. My guest today is Dr. Catherine Sanderson. Catherine is a psychologist specialized in health and development and a professor at Amherst College. She has published over 25 journal articles and book chapters, in addition to 4 college, middle school, and high school textbooks, as well as the Introduction to Psychology course for the great courses. Catherine, I'm totally planning to do this because I never studied psychology and this looks amazing. I already looked into it. A book on parenting, which we'll also talk a little bit about, but also a book called The Positive Shift, which discusses how mindset influences happiness, health, and even how long we live, and why we act, in which she examines why good people so often stay silent or do nothing in the face of wrongdoing. Catherine speaks on topics such as the science of happiness, the power of emotional intelligence and growth mindset, the art of aging well. Let's talk about that as well. And the psychology of courage and inaction. Her work has been featured in numerous mainstream media outlets, including The Washington Post, the Boston Globe, USA Today, The Atlantic, CNN, NPR, The Wall Street Journal, and CBS Sunday Morning. Catherine, welcome.
Thank you so much for this invitation to talk on such a really fundamentally important topic.
Isn't it? Thank you for saying that. Catherine, before we go to mamas, I'm so curious about so many of your research topics. Tell me, let's start with happiness. I think everybody wants to learn how to be happy. Tell me about the science of happiness. Is there a secret to happiness?
So there is a secret to happiness. And in fact, the topic of happiness very much relates to what we'll be talking about today in terms of my mom. So my mom, who is no longer living, died nearly 20 years ago. It'll be 20 years this summer, was not a happy person. Mm-hmm. She spent a lot of her life feeling anxious, feeling depressed. And frankly, she came from a family with that sort of history of challenges in terms of mental health. Her mother, her father, various of her siblings, et cetera. And I definitely acquired that same tendency, whether by nature or nurture or both. Definitely I have that tendency to ruminate and to feel anxious. And what's been fascinating for me as a nerdy psychologist is that the field of positive psychology really started kind of coming into vogue about 20 years ago now in the field of psychology. And in fact, it suggests that there are people who are naturally happier than others. So there's probably a genetic predisposition. But, and this is my important take home, there are practical strategies that we can all use, no matter where we fall on that natural genetic continuum, that can improve our happiness. And that to me has been fundamentally important. And it's frankly why I wrote the book, The Positive Shift, to give other people who maybe don't come by the happiness tendency naturally, some strategies they can use.
Did that help you?
It did help me, and it does help me. So okay. I'll talk about just a couple of, really quick things for your listeners. But what we know is that across people, across age and gender and culture, there are very consistent predictors of happiness. And I'll just talk about 3. 1, spending time in nature, being outside, looking at grass or trees or flowers or water or the sun, that is a very, very consistent predictor. And so I make a really strong point now of getting outside. In fact, after you and I finish our conversation, I'm going to strap on my sneakers and I'm going to go for a quick run to just be outside. I've spent the whole day inside writing, so this will be a wonderful break.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what's with people who live in cities?
Oh, so I'm so glad you asked that. It doesn't have to be going for a hike or watching the ocean. It can be walking through Central Park. It can be looking at nature through your window. It can be having plants inside your office or your home.
Okay.
Okay. So that's one. Two, giving. Giving overwhelmingly makes people happy. And this could be giving money to charity. It could be donating blood. It could be volunteering for an organization you care about. It could be buying a small gift for a friend or family member. Giving of any type makes us feel good about ourselves, makes us feel happier. And then three, and this is the biggest one, close relationships. So having relationships with family members, friends, romantic partners, colleagues, neighbors that are real and authentic. And that's the third one. And so here's the thing. Those are all things that we can actively do and work on. And absolutely, I do these things. It improves my happiness. And it's really been sort of a godsend for me, in fact.
Catherine, I guess for those who want to learn more, it's all in your book. But here's what this led me to. And I mentioned you were working with aging well. This sounds like tips for good aging to me.
It is.
Is it?
No, it absolutely is. And what's so interesting is that the link between happiness and health and aging and even longevity, it's very interrelated. So I did a talk a few weeks ago in an independent living retirement community in Florida. And I was asked to speak on the topic of the art of aging well. Mm-hmm. So I go to give this talk. And what was fascinating is that this community is fostering connections, right, between people who live there together. It is on the ocean. So it's literally people are watching the sea. It's in Florida. So it's very sunny. And really, it was sort of a perfect illustration of spending time in nature, doing good, continuing to keep learning. And what we know is that people who are happy actually live longer. They are healthier, they age better, they live longer. And so all of these things that we can do to be happy in our daily lives are going to pay off for us in terms of health and in terms of how long we live.
So the good message I'm taking from all of this is, because we all know or come from families, or just as you mentioned, have this predisposition to be anxious and not, some of us are just not naturally happy people. But it's very exciting to hear that we can practice happiness like a muscle, and that it works.
I love the example that you just gave of a muscle, because I think that's exactly right. There are people who are naturally happy. I'm actually married to someone who is naturally, always happy and can find that silver lining.
Lucky you.
Well, it is. No, it is. But what's fascinating is that even if that's not something that you come by naturally, you can practice. You can practice like a muscle, and you can develop that strength, even if it's not easy for you.
And now I want to move into your other topic, another book, which is Why We Act. I'm very fascinated by this topic because my mom was a very big 1968, rebellious flower child. Let's change the world. And when she was older, she would often give interviews, and she would be asked about this, and be people, are negative and say, "Hi, you 1968ers tried to change the world. What now? You didn't manage." And I envy her. I envy her for that energy and being of that generation, because of that feeling that things can still be changed and that it's worth trying. I'm worried that they were the last generation that really had such a positive, it was rebellious without anger and aggression. It was very different from what is going on in the world right now. So long story short, I do have a feeling that we generally lost a little bit of this of this need to act when we see things are not good. I have a feeling we're a little depressed in that sense of, we can't save the world, we can't make it better, we tried everything. Tell me about why we act, why we don't act, why do we have a courage to, and how did you start researching this topic?
So Another really, really great question. So I had just finished writing the book, The Positive Shift, happiness, positivity. And I was actively promoting it. I was doing interviews and, talking about it and writing about it, et cetera. And my oldest child started college. And 2 weeks after he started, he called me one night and said, "Mom, a student died in my dorm last night."
Oh, okay.
And he told me the story. And the story is just, as a mom, as a person, heartbreaking. Student was drinking. He fell and hit his head. His friends and roommates watched over him. They made sure he was still breathing. They rolled him onto his stomach to make sure he wouldn't, vomit and choke to death. But what they didn't do for 19 hours was call the hospital, was call for help. And when they finally did call, it was too late. And so the student was rushed to the hospital. His parents, they kept him alive on life support until his parents could fly in from out of state and be with him when he died. But he was 19 years old. And so I'm in the middle of doing this, book talking about happiness. But all I'm thinking about as a mom, I've got 3 kids, as a professor who, of course, works with many college students, is I just kept thinking if one student had picked up the phone and called 911, maybe that kid would be alive. And so honestly, when you ask me what prompted that book, that is what prompted it. So I'm doing this talking about happiness, but what I'm thinking about, and actually what I'm start to research and write about is, why did some people speak up in Nazi Germany? Why did some white Americans go down in and help in the civil rights movement in the American South in times of segregation? What explains people who are whistleblowers? What explains, et cetera? And right as I'm, thinking and writing about this, a couple things happen. One, the Harvey Weinstein story breaks.
Oh, okay.
And what becomes clear is that lots of people knew what he was doing for years. And they didn't say anything because he was making and breaking careers and getting people Oscars. And, so all these things happen. Then the, Olympic gymnastic doctor, story broke about all the sexual abuse and the Catholic Church and all these things. And so my book, Why We Act, examines why do good people stay silent in the face of bad behavior of all sorts. And it gives people practical tools they can use to speak up. So that's how I got into the topic. But the interesting thing in terms of the commonality of those 2 books, which are, of course, really, really different topics, is that what I love to do is I love to understand people based on research in psychology. I love to explain it to people. And then I love to give people practical tools. Okay, here's what you can do with this information so that you can speak up when there's problematic behavior in your family, in your community, in your office, in your school, in your neighborhood, et cetera.
So important. And I just want to add to this how amazing the Me Too movement was. It did go into certain extremes at one point, but it really changed a lot. And I hope this change will stay. It was fantastic. It was so badly needed. And it was beautiful to watch that once somebody dared, so many people dared to say me too.
Well, and that's actually what the research says, right? What you need is somebody
One person.
Say, well, you need one person. And then once you have, and it's really hard to be that person. Right? It's really hard to be that person. But once you have that person, it opens up and gives a permission structure. So you asked the question about, can we change the world? I think the Me Too movement is an example, right? We can.
It is. And another important thing with Me Too movement is, and why some people don't react is they think it's normal. There's no reason for fuss. I experienced sexual harassment in my corporate job. And back then I was A, young, and B, that was just how things were done, And it's fantastic that whistleblowers and courageous people dare to stand up and say, this is not normal.
Right.
Make the wrong not normal.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about your mom, Judith. Tell me about her life a little. We learned already a little bit, so now I'm curious to learn more.
Yes. So my mom had a really challenging life. So my mom grew up one of the oldest of four children, the oldest girl, three boys, three younger siblings. Her dad died when she was 15 years old. And that was, of course, a tremendous strain, for her family financially. And, she really helped raise her younger brothers in the face of her mom, becoming a single parent. My mom headed off to college when she was 18, met my father, and married him when she was 20, and had me when she was 21. So literally had me while she was still a college student, finished her degree after she had given birth to her first child. My brother was born 18 months later. So she was 22, with a new college degree, two little kids, and, not, and had really had some difficult experiences. My mom died. I'm just going to, shift to the end, but my mom died at 57 after having risen really young, but risen through the ranks that at the time of her death, she had been the vice president for the University of Chicago Medical Center. So she had risen from somebody who, really barely got a college degree because of the presence of a baby and then another baby. And yet worked to build a career, a really impressive career in which she was very, very well regarded, and, was really inspirational to me in terms of thinking about somebody who was able to persevere through adversity, to balance a big job and also being a mom. So I think I take lots of lessons, from her life experience. And yes, died at 57. I'm 55 as we do this interview. And, really, should have had a lot more life, but really did amazing and impressive things in the amount of time she had.
I have two questions. Did she stay married?
My parents did not stay married. She divorced my dad at some point when I was in college. She left him at some point when I was in high school. They divorced in college. She did remarry, and she was married to a wonderful man, her second husband at the time of her death.
May I ask what happened? Why did she pass away at 57?
She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, which is, a cancer that is often diagnosed very late. It's not something that people are routinely screened for. And she died 4 months after her diagnosis. So she was diagnosed officially in March, and she died in July.
I'm sorry about that. Very young. I lost my mom when she was 69, and I feel that was way too young.
That is also way too young, right?
Yeah.
And when my mom died, again, at 57, her mom was still alive and was in her 80s. And my mom's grandmother had lived into her 90s. So certainly, we expected, that she would be around, and certainly till her 80s, probably until her 90s. So it was really, heartbreaking and unexpected.
Before we talk about her lessons, I'm curious about how she managed all of this. I'm curious about her character a little bit.
So I think she was extremely strong. There's a lot that has sort of been talked about in the psychology community about firstborn daughters And so my mom was a firstborn daughter. Her mom was a firstborn daughter. Her mother's mother was actually a firstborn daughter. I am a firstborn daughter. And there's been a lot written about how firstborn daughters really take a lot of responsibility. They do that in general. Girls tend to be dutiful and conscientious. And as I described before, my mom, lost her dad when she was in high school and with 3 younger siblings. So she really sort of took over, raising those kids in a large extent. One of her youngest brother, who was 10 years younger than she was, actually came and lived with my family for a period of time when I was, 5 or 6 and he was finishing high school. So she was really extraordinarily strong, extraordinarily competent, in that way. And even in the face.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So what did you learn from her?
So let's see. I guess I learned one, that you can persevere, that bad things can happen to you and it doesn't have to define you. So losing a parent, when she was very young, did not define her. Getting divorced did not define her. And, she was able to persevere even in the face of great adversity. And that has been a lesson that I frankly have thought about, again and again and again. So that's one thing. Another thing that I think has been sort of remarkable in its influence is my mom really prioritized family. So she was very close to her mom her entire life. She was very close to her brothers. We had a family tradition in which every year we would gather, often at Thanksgiving, but sometimes at Christmas or sometimes, at another time, with her brothers, her mother, her brothers, their wives, their children, my cousins. And that was just, what we did. Like every year we did it. And it was, I was always there and she was always there. And what I love is that commitment to family has been something that has stuck with me. So even though my mom has been gone for 20 years, we still get together with my uncles and their wives and, my cousins, et cetera. In fact, as we're recording this, 2 of my cousins are coming to stay at my house this weekend with their children who are young, and really sort of saying that, family is so important, and thinking about the importance of maintaining those connections and sharing stories is something that, I really take, as a lesson I continue to appreciate. And the final lesson that I'll take, the other thing, which is also interesting and that it links back to something that we have talked about, is my mom, although she didn't have a higher degree than college, was an extraordinarily good writer. That she had to write a lot for her job. She had to learn about writing. And she, throughout high school, edited my papers, taught me about revising, taught me about word choice. When do you use which versus when do you use that? And my brother will still call me sometimes and be like, okay, here's the sentence. Is it which or is it that? Because, that's something mom, always focused on. And, as you and I have talked about, I'm a professor who pretty much writes for a living. I write books, I write articles, and my mom taught me about writing and revising and the importance of kind of sticking with it to get the right words. And I love that.
I love this lesson so much because I just started teaching strategic communications, strategic writing at a university in Vienna. And they asked me to teach digital writing, and which I started teaching. But then I realized those kids really need to learn basics of writing and communications. And through them, I learned how important good writing is, because through learning how to write well, you learn how to communicate well. You learn how to talk, how to speak, how to have a good conversation. You just learn about, which is so important whatever you do. If a person comes to repair your washing machine, you have to be able to explain to them simply and directly so they understand what's going on. So I love this. This really love hearing this now.
It was important for me then, and it's still important for me now. Like, it has really stayed with me.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about family. Some of us don't have, unfortunately, big families. Do you think that translates into what we talked about earlier, which is generally relationships? Having friends, having people around you, having a relationship with your neighbors.
Yes. No, well, absolutely. And what's interesting is that my mom, as I said, was married at the time of her death to somebody who is, sort of my stepfather, although I was married to my husband before my mom married him. So it's not like, he grew up with me. But I am now close with his two daughters. And I'm also, after my mom's death, got remarried. I'm now also close to her children. And so when you think about sort of extended family, it can be very broad. It can be friends. It can be friends who are family. And I think that's really, what's so wonderful is thinking about the way in which we can build community in so many different ways and have those connections. It doesn't have to be blood.
Yeah, exactly. Catherine, now I'm curious to hear if there was something important which you had to learn by yourself, something she was not able or willing to teach you.
Well, so I will say, I think all the time about how do I raise a teenager? How do I like things that, I was married and I had little kids when she died. I had a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old and an infant. But, and she was a wonderful grandmother and she was very helpful in, dealing with the, toilet training or the temper tantrum or, et cetera. But I think all the time about how much I would have called her during their teenage years or their college years. And I think she would have taught me, but, we ran out of time, in that way. And we didn't anticipate that, she would not be there, but boy, I really wish I had kind of picked her brain for all of those pieces of advice. And I know I was a terribly difficult high school student. I was, she and I fought and I didn't like her and, et cetera. But I really wish that she had been around, for the challenges I faced in my own parenting.
Do you have a tip now for raising teenagers?
Oh my goodness.
I mean,
it's hard.
I'm asking trick questions.
No. Well, so here's my tip. There's a wonderful quote by the writer Nora Ephron, which says, when your children are teenagers, it's really important to have a dog because that way, when you get home, someone is always happy to see you. So there is my big parenting tip. Get a dog. That is my big parenting tip because they're often not happy to see you. What people tell me is that they like you again. Like, that you go through this and then they like you again. And that is definitely the case for my older kids. The youngest one, I think we're still kind of working on hitting that curve, but they do tell me they'll like me again. So
Catherine, thank you so much. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that we missed that you'd like to mention?
No, this was such a delightful conversation. I can't wait to listen to all of your interviews. Moms are the most important for many of us, sort of a figure in our lives. And I love that you had this idea for this series, and I can't wait to listen.
Thank you so much. They're beautiful. These ladies are sharing some amazing stories and lessons. I'm so excited about it. I even re-listen to them.
I can't wait.
If you enjoy Thank You Mama and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyouMama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Teider. That's Tajder. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.